I think that the concept of famine that we have in our mind, which you get if you do, let's say, a Google Images search for famine or starvation, occupies a particular place. And it's actually the wrong place. It's a place where it's associated with drought, with climatic shocks, with food production failures, with withered crops, with Africa, with overpopulation. The concept that we have of mass atrocities and genocide is somewhere else in our minds, associated with gas chambers and killing squads. And actually, we need to bring these two concepts together, because the reality of the history of famine and mass starvation, particularly over the last 200 years, and especially in the 20th century, has been that famine, starvation, has been a deliberate political act, an act of atrocity. The link between population growth and famine is what I call a zombie concept. It's a concept that is refuted time and time again, and yet comes back to torment the living. Over the last 150 years, while the population on the globe has risen by a factor of 4, 5, even 6 times, the number of famines and the numbers of people who die in famines has been reduced to unprecedentedly low levels. And this isn't just true globally, it's true in countries that have been historically very prone to famine, like India and Ethiopia. Climate change will create hardship. It could even create hunger. But where the burden of that hardship and hunger falls is entirely a political decision. There is nothing automatic about the impact of climate change translating into hunger, let alone famine. In the 100 years up to the 1970s, decade by decade, about 10 million people died in famines around the world. And that number has been reduced to a very small fraction of what it was beforehand. And there are many reasons for this. There are reasons to do with economic improvement, reduction in poverty, better agricultural practices, etc., particularly in South Asia. There are reasons to do with the growth of democracy in the media, and there's also reasons to do with the growth of the humanitarian business, and it's far more professional and effective than it was before. So this is a tremendous achievement. What we see over the last 30 years is famines and famine mortality falling to an all-time historical low over quite a sustained period of time. We begin to see it picking up again in the last few years. Not to the historic levels, but nonetheless a disturbing turnaround, associated always with war, and with war conducted in a way that the lives of ordinary people are regarded as expendable. And Yemen, I think, is the defining famine of our generation, the worst famine of our times. And I think the reason why famine has not been outlawed under international law in an absolute and strong manner is that we ourselves, the Western powers, the United States, Britain, have actually used hunger, used blockade as a tool of war throughout history, especially in the 20th century. And for that reason, the international law books do not contain outright prohibitions on starvation of the type that really are warranted. If those were to be there, and if there were to be public outrage, public outcry against the acts that create famine, the way in which starvation is something that people do to each other, it is a crime perpetrated by one person or on another. If there were to be that outrage, and if that were to be articulated in terms of it being a crime, then I believe famine would be ended for good.